Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and welcome back to Goose Junkies episode 32. We are very glad to be back after a few months of a hiatus because we decided to take some time off to focus on some personal life things and school for some of us. And now that we are on break, we are ready to go and we have lots of content for you all. I know we promised in our Halloween special when we did Attack of the Jack-o'-lanterns versus Pumpkinhead that we were going to do Calling All Creeps and Alien Candy for this episode. But we decided to move that one back to episode 33, and instead we wanted to give y'all an impromptu winter/holiday special. I know we're kind of late after Christmas delivering it to you all, but better late than never. We decided to face off a Goosebumps short story that is kind of popular if you know the Tales to Give You Goosebumps series. It comes from book 6, and it's called The Double Dip Horror. And we decided to face it off with a revival season episode from Are You Afraid of the Dark from season 6 called The Tale of Bigfoot Ridge. As always, I'm joined tonight by my two favorite people in the Goosebumps community, Micah and BD. How are you guys doing tonight?
Yo, people and patrons of the night. It is your boy, the Horrorlander. We are back. My baby mama issues aside, my bill collecting issues aside, my school issues aside. I'm here with my brother and ready to go back into some winter spirits. And I'm looking forward to this episode because these are pretty much two underrated stories, I would see. People like it, but not as much as I think they should be talking about it. And it should definitely be more popular material. So looking forward to tonight. And especially, main thing I want to say is thank you guys for supporting us, and we are back.
Great words. Now, Micah, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Just enjoying my Christmas break. Just happy to be back at the podcast, doing some fun Goosebumps, children's horror content.
I'm always Jones to talk about kids' horror. Always. And as usual, Spongy can't make it with us tonight, sadly, but he did type up some good stuff, and we're going to be reading it off as we go along in the comparison. So, winter. Winter themed horror, right? As we'll see in the discussion later on, it is kind of a popular niche in the horror subgenre. But in kids' horror, there's not a lot of it out there. So we got to the point where we have to kind of pick what we can actually use, right? So we decided to look to Tales to Give You Goosebumps Book 6, which I think is the most openly holiday kids horror thing ever put out. It's a collection of 10 short stories. It's kind of rare. If you want to go buy the book online, you're going to notice the price. But if you want to hear reviews on the book, you might be deterred from wanting to buy it. But there are some really iconic and great content in that book. As a matter of fact, I would go out of my way to say about 3 or 4 stories from Tales to Give You Goosebumps Book 6 are all-time great short stories from Goosebumps, and some are even top 20 of all time, of all across the spectrum. And Double Dip Horror is if you know about it, is a popular story. But in the grand scheme of Goosebumps, because it's in an obscure book that's rare and it's never been reprinted, not a lot of people talk about it. And BD, I want you to start off with us tonight about the Double Dip Horror. Tell us what the story's about and lead off with your thoughts and we'll pass it around.
Now, before I do go into a plot synopsis, I just want to say that hypothetically speaking, in GTA 5, for all of you out there, if you did want to hypothetically speaking go into GTA 5 on a website called Internet Archive, hypothetically, you could also read the book online there. But that is, of course, just a theory, nothing confirmed, especially if the law is watching me. Anyway, so the plot synopsis of the Double Dip Horror takes place with a set of middle school twins that are going to a snow ski resort called the Ice Cream Cone Ski Resort, I believe, which sounds like a Scooby-Doo location title, which I thought was kind of fun. This is a place where all of the different snow-top, mountaintop hills are basically named after desserts. You got the banana split, coconut sprinkles, etc. That's why it's called the Ice Cream Lounge. And the twins are there because they got selected by one of their school teachers to basically coach some younger kids in snow skiing. And because the set of twins are very prolific at skiing, they're very skilled. And while teaching these kids they'd be able to do some skiing themselves and have some fun, they decided to take on the opportunity. So they get to the ski lounge, and they decide that, you know what, we're going to then get ready to teach the kids. Let's get acclimated to where we're going to be staying. And as they're waiting in essentially the lobby area, one of the twins, which is essentially the main character of the story, sees that there's this boy on top of the balcony in the building with this yellow ski jacket on, freckles. He's basically waving hi to her, and she seems to kind of get that this might be one of the kids that they're going to be teaching within the classes. And when they finally get to their room, they have a little bit of banter between each other, and the main character decides, you know what, let me go get some ice for some of our drinks. And when she goes into the hallway of this ski lodge, she sees that down the corridor, all the lights are off by where the ice machine is. It makes her feel ominous. She's kind of creeped out, but she decides to go there anywhere. She thinks that she might be paranoid because the entire time that she's there, she feels that somebody's watching her, but she doesn't find any evidence that there is somebody around with them. When she gets to the ice machine and she tries to get some ice, all of a sudden some unknown force basically pushes her head first into the machine. She freaks out, thinks that there might be some paranormal activity or something going on, but then she brushes it off and gets back. And then eventually they start teaching kids how to do snow skiing. And when they start teaching kids, she notices that the kid that waved to her inside of the building is one of the kids that she's teaching, but this kid is rebellious. He keeps rebelling against all of the authority. Her and her sister are taking turns teaching the kids because they want one of them to go skiing, one of them to teach, and then alternate. And as they're having a hard time with the kid, unable to basically keep him under control, they hatch up a plan to kind of get some revenge on the kid and try to basically get their authority back. But what happens later on in the story is that there's a big twist as to who the kid might be, what's the kid's relation to this ski lodge, and it is a lot darker and a lot sinister than one might have expected. And that's essentially the short story without me giving too much away. So what are my thoughts? This is one of the most heavy-hitting short stories that I've read in Goosebumps, because as you're reading it, you get this creepy, subtle atmosphere throughout the entire book. That scene inside of the ski lodge was creepy, with the main character feel like she's getting watched. You have that weird experience of her getting pushed. There's something really kind of, I guess, juxtaposing between the very fun setting of this ski lodge being named after desserts, all these fun hills, people going skiing, the bright colors of the building, and yet there's this creepy undertone, this thing that you can't understand what really is going on and what evil force or evil twist might come later. And when that twist does come, it hits you so hard because it's almost bittersweet in a way. It's emotional. It's kind of innocent. But the things that happen towards the end of the story are very dark and disturbing, especially when you get to the very end and you find out that these main characters might be in a lot of trouble because of a little lie that they were doing. And that little lie backfires severely with the little sentence at the end of it. So this story definitely relies on its punches, but if you're reading this short story for the first time, I think that you will genuinely fall in love with it. It's great. And even upon a reread, I still enjoyed it quite a bit. Now, I gave this short story a 10 out of 10 on a short story scale, but my scale for short stories can't be the same as compared to longer media. So if I were to translate it, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. This is a great one. This is one that I think a lot of you guys would remember. And for sure, you guys should check it out if you want a more creepy, heavy-hitting short story to read, especially if you love Goosebumps. So those are my thoughts. I'll pass it off to anybody that wants to take over.
Yeah, great points, BD. Micah, if you want to go ahead and go, I'll let you go. What's your thoughts on Double Dip Horror?
I enjoyed the short story. I think it's a really fun wintertime read. I think that the setting is very well done. It's a very interesting way that Stein wrote it, to the way where, as BD mentioned, taking this very colorful, bright, kind of kids-oriented resort setting of like an ice cream parlor and adding these really sinister and creepy elements to it really works. And that's what I think Stein excels at a lot of the time, is taking those innocent childlike things and turning it on its head and adding horror elements to it. Like, his biggest example, Haunted Mask. But I think this story just really does a really great job throughout it, building the tension and just making you wonder what's going on here. You there's something up with this kid, but you don't know what it is. And just when you get to that twist ending, there are some implied deaths. We'll just say that. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I think just That's the thing I've noticed about a lot of the Tales short stories is that a lot of the time some of these kids will straight up die at the end, which is very unlike most normal Goosebumps stuff. So I really appreciate that Stein went a little darker for these stories than he does in the normal book series. And I think this short story overall just encapsulates that very well and really just hits you that 1-2 punch at the end with the two reveals that you get. And it's just, I think it's a great story overall. It's a little slow paced, so I had to knock at some points for that. And I think the sibling banter was a little much. So I give it an 8 out of 10. I still really enjoyed the short story.
Yeah, I forgot to mention there are some pretty heavy hitting near death experiences in the short story, and there is like an urban legend kill involved where maybe not somebody had died in an urban legend around the ski resort, and that one was an explicit kill explained, and man, that was like what the hell? Was not expecting that.
Yeah, great points, Micah and BD. I guess I'll chime in my thoughts about this short story. Um, I first experienced it years ago. This was a very early on experience I had when I first started my channel, actually. And I remember reading the short story collection, and I was not a big fan of it wholesale because there's a lot of mid in the book and just really bad stories. When I got to Double Dip Horror, I read it and I was like blown away. Even though I loved Why I Hate Jack Frost, I loved A Holly Jolly Holiday, this one stuck out to me a little bit more than the others, even though I think Why I Hate Jack Frost is my favorite short story from that collection. But this one, I was like, wow, like Stein or whoever wrote the short story, who knows, um, whoever wrote it tried to take The Shining and tweak it and make it for kids, right? And that's what a lot of people say that have experienced this story. This is Goosebumps' version of The Shining. And you wouldn't just think that this could be a ripoff. No, they actually have some unique ideas here, and there's some plot twists and some background in this, like to the urban legend and the scenery and the backdrop of the story that just creates this very unique vibe going on with the story. There's nothing else like it that I've experienced in Goosebumps, where you have like this twin dynamic, and they have a pretty realistic banter with each other when they are trying to co-teach the ski team or whatever it was in the story. I'm trying to go off memory here. It's been a while since I read it. I think I read it about a week or two ago, so, or I reread it. So, but you know, the boy character, and if you're trained in Goosebumps, you can kind of see the twist coming, because whenever there's an overly friendly redhead in a Goosebumps book, kid with freckles, that's usually a sign that you should not trust it. I'm not going to spoil some books that have that, but look for that. But I thought the urban legend was really creepy, and the legend of that kill. I was like, holy crap, Goosebumps is going there. And this is one of the times in Goosebumps where it's not afraid to hurt a kid. And yeah, I mean, it gets metal horns for that. Metal horns for that. Kids horror just doesn't go to this length often. And honestly, I just think that it's a well written story. I think it has its fun moments, like the whole climax when they're going down the ski slope, and that's involved with the plot, plot twist and all of that. I thought that was harrowing. And the first time I read that, I was like, holy crap. Holy crap. It felt like the ending of the Stanley Kubrick's The Shining the first time I watched that, where I'm like, holy crap, it has that similar punch, right? Um, I don't know what else to say. It's one of those stories that it's a short and sweet thing. Yes, it's hard to kind of compare this to an episode or a full book because it's so short. I think it's like what, 10 or 11 pages, if that. But it flies by, and you forget that it's a short story. And honestly, if in an alternate reality, if Stein or whoever wanted to actually incorporate this idea into a full book, I think there's enough there to build on it. Because you have a legend, you can build up more scenes like the ice scene. You can build up more scenes like the slope shenanigans. You can keep building up and escalating the stakes, make it a more mystery focused thing, kind of like a whodunit. and bring it to the same reveal. I think that this story has a limited potential, and for that, that's what makes a good short story. Could this be a full? Could you make a movie out of this? Could you make an episode out of this? Could you make it a full book? It has all of that going for it, and it excels at what it does at being a short story. It's weirdly inventive and unique for kids horror. Like I said, there's nothing else like it. I'd give it a 10 out of 10. It's top 5 Tales to Give You Goosebumps short story for me. Always has and always will be.
I think another thing too is like a lot of the short stories sometimes when you guys read them, sometimes they could be so over the top that you kind of have a little bit of a distance from the story. But the way that Stein made the plot of this one and his writing in it, it's so immersive that even though it is like a 12-page short story, you can imagine yourself in every scene of it, especially if you've been out in the snow, if you've been at snow resorts, you can imagine yourself in this situation. And just like he brought up The Shining, you know, the twins, the old hotel, you can get creeped out right along with what the characters are feeling in the moment of the pages. So I think that that's also a great thing that Stein does with it. It's relatable and you can immerse yourself.
Exactly. So we seem to all be pretty positive on the story. Let's see how Spongy is on the Double Dip horror, and then we'll go into Are You Afraid of the Dark?
All right, let's take a look. So, as for Spongy's thoughts on the Double Dip horror, he says this one is all in the ending, which I love. The twin setup is fun, and as cruel as it is, it does serve as a fitting punishment for them using their twin powers like this. Bobby is fun, and I do like his motivation. It does rely quite a bit on the ending, but the story is mostly well constructed enough for it to work, even if you appreciate it more once you think over it. However, I knock points off for that ice machine scene. Aside from it being blatant filler, it doesn't even make sense as this is implied to be Bobby and he only kills people through those races. Why was he even doing that? I wanted to rate this higher, but the nature of it, plus that does knock it slightly. Otherwise, it still has one of the best ending notes ever. I mean, I think part of it, I mean, I don't want to go to it. I mean, he did kind of a little bit spoiler, but I think also part of it is just he is explained as a rebellious kid, so I think he's just kind of taking the piss out of the main characters in the situation. He's kind of a rebellious kid in that sense. That's how I thought of it.
Just trying to give her a little spook.
Yeah, because his personality is described as being sort of messing with a certain group of people, which they fit. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how I read his character. He's just, that's just his personality. Like,
yeah.
he does these things because, he feels a certain way about certain people, and that's just how he is.
Plus, the character did say that he only targets a specific group, and again, the main characters are that. So anything that he does from that point on can be chalked up for that. So.
Yeah. So that's all we have to say about Double Dip Horror, which leads us to Are You Afraid of the Dark? Tale of the Bigfoot Ridge. So to kind of preface this, I actually never got to see this episode back in the late 90s, I don't think, at least in cognitive memory. So this was actually one that I caught recently on a casual watch. This was one of the last episodes I had to watch for Are You Afraid of the Dark, just on a casual experience. And I remember the first time I watched it, I really loved it. But every time that I've watched it, it goes down a little bit, just a little bit further, and I start to notice a little more things about it that I just don't like. But I think this is a template and the proof in the pudding to all the naysayers that you can't do snow and kids horror because of budget. Boo. That's the wrong answer. Are You Afraid of the Dark? Even though they only made 13 episode seasons, they went above and beyond here. They went above the Call of Duty and they immersed us viewers into a snowy tundra setting. Set in a town, or I guess a mountainous Canadian village of sorts, where there's a ski lodge and snow lifts, and they have snowboarders and skiers. And you have two characters who are played by very recognizable late 90s teen actors. You have Brooke Nevin, who plays the main character Danny. You might recognize her from Animorphs. She played, I think, Rachel, who was, the blonde Animorphs chick. And then you have Hayden Christensen, Anakin Skywalker. You might know him as Zane from Dummy 3. from Goosebumps. This is, I think, his only other kids horror appearance. He plays Danny's brother, Kirk. And these two are some of the best Are You Afraid of the Dark protagonists. And honestly, some of the best siblings I've ever seen in kids horror. You know, in this, I guess, winter time, they like to partake in snowboarding and skiing and what have you. But unfortunately for Danny in specifics, she's going through a very hard time because her friend Gina randomly disappeared. And it's, you know, heart of winter. It's very, very rough out there in the elements, and it's not looking good for Gina's situation. And this is weighing on Danny's conscience. And very early on in the episode, we get a sense that Gina might be lingering around. Maybe her spirit is trying to guide Danny to her body. Because when Danny is out skiing with her brother one day, she notices that her friend is on a snowboard nearby. And when she goes to try to talk with her, she disappears. So Danny goes home by herself, you know, upset that about what she saw. And Kirk comes home later and realizes that his sister is really down in the dumps and wants to help try to find Gina because the authorities just haven't been able to succeed in that. And this is something that she feels compelled to do. But when she admits that, these reoccurring things start happening. She starts hearing the voice of Gina asking to come help her and what have you. And then she's watching home videos on her TV. And in the home video, this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen Are You Afraid of the Dark do, mind you. There's a recording of Gina, but Gina kind of breaks the fourth wall in the recording and says, "Can you come help me? I'm at Bigfoot Ridge," or whatever she says. And Gina makes Gina, you know, breaks through to Danny, and Danny makes note of it. So the next day, she decides to go out on her own to Bigfoot Ridge, which happens to be 30 miles away. I think that's what the episode says. And she gets on her family's snowmobile and braves the tough tundra, knowing that a snowstorm is coming. But her brother Kirk tries to urge her not to go, but he understands why she's going. And we see Danny make this journey to Bigfoot Ridge, and she thinks that she sees Gina again and follows Gina down the slopes up to this cabin. And this cabin is isolated on top of this area in the mountains. There's nobody around. The building has no power. But before Danny can get inside the building, she encounters her brother Kirk again. And Kirk's like, "I'm not going to let you do this by yourself, so we can investigate the building and maybe hide out here for the night because the storm is coming, or maybe we should just look around and then get home quick before, you know, we get caught up in it." But when they enter the building, they're greeted by somebody that looks like Gina, but it's not quite what they think it should be, right? And they hear a voice in another room and they investigate it. And it turns out there's this old woman in there that claims that she's Gina. And they put two and two together that something's not right here. And this old woman who claims to be Gina breaks down the backstory. And we don't know how long Gina has been disappeared for in the story, but we get a sense that she's probably been in this cabin for a while. She gives this whole backstory about what the two have been seeing with this other person that looks like Gina. And it might be a creature called the Umbra, and it has glowing green eyes, and apparently it has the power, if you look inside of the eyes, to turn you old and take your energy, and it lives in the shadows, and the only weakness it kind of has is light. So that's why she's been camping out in this one room, because she can make fire and what have you. But she also drops a bombshell saying that there's a whole other room in the cottage of dead bodies. And you're like, okay, that's hardcore for kids horror. But we never actually get to see it, sadly. But I understand why we don't see it. Well, from this point on in the story, the trio realize that they're pretty much stuck in this house, at least through the night, because the storm is coming. And they're running very low on firewood. Kirk has brought a flashlight, but it's running low on batteries. And their only saving grace to actually thwart this Umbra creature is to turn the power back on, which would benefit them. But the power generator is outside the building. And anywhere they go outside of this room with the fireplace, there's a chance that the Umbra can come out and surprise attack them, sneak attack them. And it comes to the point of the climax of the story where one of the characters has to go brave the storm outside to try to get the generator back on, and the others are left to the Umbra's disposal. And the Umbra almost gets its way, but because this is Are You Afraid of the Dark, and because it doesn't like to give characters bad endings, you got to put two and two together that maybe these characters come out on top. You might see a villain reveal, and you get your kumbaya ending. But for this specific case, I think the kumbaya ending is not corny because of the rich emotional undertones that's been going on in the story. It feels more earned, especially with the relationship of Danny and her friend Gina. And that's all you're really going to expect out of the story. I think that this one exemplifies the tongue-in-cheek nature of Dark, where it goes for that sympathetic, character route. But unlike most episodes, it doesn't go to that forced corny route. It goes down to a real relatable route about losing a friend. And at the heartbeat of this story, it's about losing a friend and trying to keep the memory of that intact and or saving somebody you care about. And that's the driving force of the plot. And it makes you really resonate with Danny and Kirk's characters. While Kirk is not necessarily actively trying to rescue Gina, he is trying to actively be there for his sister who's going through a hard time. And I have to say this, while the characters are good, I'm being genuine when I say this. Brooke Nevin in Hayden Christensen's acting is great in this episode. I mean, they legit bring the goods. This is one of easily the best performed Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes I've seen. And going back to the setting of it, the setting just immerses you into this isolation, this desperation that they have in this cabin. And not to mention the cabin has a really gloomy look to it, and you feel this glooming and overhead tension throughout the whole episode because of how the character of the Umbra is displayed. The Umbra is executed in that 1978 Michael Myers way. And kids horror sometimes can pull this off, very rarely though, but they manage to pull off a character that you feel is in the shadows, but they're not necessarily shown. And that to me is great tension building. And the Umbra is probably one of the more threatening Are You Afraid of the Dark villains, given that there's a body count and they actually try to harm these kids at any given chance it gets. So, yeah, kudos to Are You Afraid of the Dark there. Now, I do have some problems, and I'm sure that you guys are probably going to touch on this for me in the story. And it mainly circumvents around all the context involving Gina's character. Now, I know Gina was not described to be missing for an undisclosed amount of time. The episode glosses over that. But when the characters find Gina, Gina somehow knows what this creature is called. When the characters have no idea what this is, because there's no looming urban legend or anything about the Umbra to start you off with the story, so you don't know where the stuff is coming from. And then the Umbra itself has these certain abilities that are very vague, and you can kind of piece in your mind what exactly is going on. There's like a catch-all ability of projecting the mind and sentience across miles. You can project your voice. You can put yourself into technology and warp it, what have you. You can manifest your physical form to lead people to doom, which is very methodical. And while that's all fine and dandy, there's an aspect to the Umbra's character that involves light, right? And I'm just going to leave it at that. Its weakness is light. But there's various scenes where we know that the Umbra is there that is in broad daylight. So what exactly is going on here? There's just too much underlying context being not presented. And I feel like what could have remedied this episode wholesale is maybe a flashback with Gina, and Gina can give her side of the story in a flashback and catch us up to speed that way. But just being told all this stuff kind of secondhand and not explicit doesn't help the context whatsoever, and it kind of takes it out of it. Just a little bit, but not too much. Because I gave this episode maybe like a 4.6 out of 5 stars. I also will say this: the mid portion of the episode does get kind of boring, if I'm being honest. When you get to the kids being stuck in the fireplace room, not a lot is going on. But I guess it's kind of needed to build up tension to the climax. But yeah, not a big fan of that. But other than that, I think this is a great episode. very underrated Are You Afraid of the Dark episode that many people do sleep on. Because it's a season 6 episode, you should go check this out. Especially if you want some good winter horror for your kids' horror palette. I'm going to pass it over to whoever else wants to take it next.
Okay, you want to do it or you want me to do it?
I can go. So I definitely have the hot take of the group. I will say I personally am not a big fan of this episode. I think that there are some good things about it. Don't get me wrong. I don't hate this episode by any means. It has some great atmosphere. I think the winter atmosphere is very well done. There's a lot of great cinematography with the snow shots and stuff for a low budget show. Obviously, it's not masterful cinematography or anything, but for Are You Afraid of the Dark standards, the cinematography is really good. The snow is well shot. The whole cabin that you see like throughout most of the last half of the episode is very creepy and very atmospheric, and I really like how they lit it and all that stuff. I think that there's some cool stuff. The Umbra is a very creepy and sinister villain. I think that it is cool that it does kind of give it this sinister, lurking in the shadows kind of tone to it, and just the body count, obviously, making it much more of a immediate threat. But overall, I think the episode was just kind of lacking, in my opinion. I felt that it just was very boring throughout the first like 3 quarters until you get to the climax, really. I found it kind of boring. There is a good mystery that they do weave throughout it. I think the mystery is built up well, but it's just very drawn out. And I find that I got bored while watching it. And honestly, I didn't like their acting. I think that Brooke Nevin is solid. I like her. I think she does a good job. She has some good emotion. But I honestly thought Hayden Christensen was very wooden. Like,
Come
I don't
on,
know.
you compare this to Attack of the Clones and tell me that this is not good acting from him.
The Phantom Cab, bro.
I mean, okay, it's better than Attack of the Clones. It's better than Attack of the Clones. I will give it that. I think both this and his performance as Zane are still better than the stuff he did in the prequels.
Have you seen some of the other acting on Are You Afraid of the Dark?
But like, I would say like, I guess comparing like to his other kid horror appearance as Zane, I like him as Zane a little bit more. I think he has a bit more of a solid performance there. But he's still not awful by any means. But I felt like he was just kind of underwhelming in my opinion compared to Brooke Nevin, who also, of course, was another one. She's another Goosebumps alumni because she was Erin in Shocker on Shock Street. So that's another little fun thing that she was also in. But I think that overall, it was just kind of an average episode. In my opinion, it was kind of ended underwhelmingly. I felt like it could have had a little bit more of a climax, I guess. It still has some fun stuff to it, but I feel like, I don't know, it just is a little dragged out. It has a little bit of an underwhelming ending, in my opinion. I'm not a big fan of the whole Kumbaya endings. Like, even if it is earned, it's still, for a horror show, you don't want that kind of an ending. And I think that I also just didn't find the episode very scary. So I gave this like a 5 out of 10. It was just okay, in my opinion. I know it's a hot take, but I don't know. It was fine. I don't think it was awful by any means, but it wasn't great either to me.
I got 2 things I want to say. I totally agree with the Kumbaya ending. That gets annoying in Are You Afraid of the Dark very quick. But when it's deserved, I think it's fine. Like, this one, I feel is deserved given the subject matter because they actually took an emotional angle with this one compared to, like, 90s dad tropes like Guardian's Curse and corny stuff like that. Like, that goes the full corny route. This isn't all too corny, so I can be more forgiving. But I will say, to the boring thing, what I think would have been better if they didn't want to rid the flashlight battery thing early on, because I think that's the biggest missed opportunity is using the flashlight to go explore this huge cabin. That could have facilitated the mid portion of the episode and kind of helped build up what exactly they're dealing with, because I don't think we ever really get a sense of what exactly they're being put up against. If they would have found the room with the bodies, that would have been maybe one thing. You didn't have to show the bodies in there, but maybe just show some bones or something. I don't know. And go a little bit dark with it. And maybe some more interactions with the Umbra using more of their powers and maybe more mind gamey stuff, because we see the Umbra legit baiting Danny to come to the cabin, right? play more into that in the cabin. Why is the Umbra taken out of the plot when they get in there? Why are they just sitting in the room with the fireplace for so long? It just kind of sinks the fun of it. And I totally get what you're saying. It does have its boring stride in that mid portion. I feel like they could have done way more if they wanted to, but it is what it is.
I also feel like that the climax could have added some more stakes, like in the scene where you see Danny having her like life force kind of drained by the Umbra when the Umbra kind of like takes her position. Have Danny grow old, like give some stakes. Like the Umbra is like killing her, and like they need to her. And I can't remember the brother's name, but he needs to hurry and do something before she dies, because like you just don't really feel like there's a lot of stakes because she just stays the same age the whole time. Like I feel like if they actually showed her aging, even if it was like awful 90s transition CGI, I feel like that would have at least heightened the stakes a little bit more for me.
To me, I think the aging aspect doesn't even need to be there in the story because there's really no real reason why it is in there to begin with, other than maybe to make sense of why Gina doesn't have the energy to leave the cabin on her own will during daytime. Because if you think about it, if the Umbra doesn't like light, all you have to do is break a window and just jump out, go run away. Brave the elements, but you got 30 miles to get to civilization. Try your hand at that, I guess. But that's the only reason I can think of why they made her old. Because if she's old, she has brittle bones. She can't move. Blah blah blah. She has to sit here and rest. You don't need that. It just feels random. So, BD, if you have anything you want to chime in, or you just want to go into your thoughts?
I guess I could just go into my thoughts. So I guess the first thing I would say is that I think this episode definitely should be watched by everybody who watched this episode of ours, because this is one of the ones that I would vouch that if it was not stuck to season 6 and it was in one of the earlier seasons, this would probably be one of the most popular episodes of the show, in my opinion, because not only does it have the star power of obviously Hayden Christensen, played Anakin, he was in Night of the Dummy 3. As you said, the actress who plays Danny is in Animorphs, but the setting of the snow is really fun, really good, really unique. One of the best things I like about this episode is the villain does pose a threat level. There are plenty of scenes throughout the episode where you find skeletons, aka corpses, that are in closets that are all throughout the lodge. Even Gina herself says that there's bodies all over this cabin that are basically victims of the Umbra. You also have the fact that the Umbra can essentially project itself out and kind of use this kind of projected body hologram to sort of lure people in. You see it's able to perform paranormal activities such as taking over the TV. Now, if they were really at good budget, you should have had a grudge scene where Gina just comes out the TV, but we'll leave it at that from mine. But overall, I just think that the villain's really good, setting's really good. Again, the acting is great. And one of the big things, the reason why I always kind of point out kids' horror acting is because, yes, when you're watching like adult movies, you notice bad acting, but it's not always as apparent. It can sometimes be fun. When you see kids' horror acting and it's amateur, it can really take you out of the episode, especially if you're watching these Canadian kids' horror episodes like Goosebumps, you're watching Are You Afraid of the Dark, because like Phantom Cab, like all these episodes, the acting could be so bad, so scripted, that it's like, yeah, you put it aside because you like the plot and stuff, but you have a distance to it. Here, the acting feels so natural. It's so emotionally good. It's so emotionally engaging that I feel like the episode deserves extra points. Like Comp mentioned, that because the relationship between the siblings is so good, because you feel the connection with Gina, you actually see how much Danny cares about Gina. She says, "This is the best friend who completes my sentences. She completes my thoughts. I can't leave her behind." And she takes on the danger just to save her best friend. And even that kumbaya ending, you see Gina is literally has her arm over Danny. She's relying on her, supporting on her, and thanking her as a friend. All those good acting moments kind of make this such a memorable episode to me. And it's why I can rewatch it as much as I want to, because I'm always going to believe the actors and believe the threat level. Now with that, I do have 4 big plot holes to the episode. And I will say it's still a very good episode, but there are 4 big things I did want to kind of mention and highlight on, and they kind of touch upon what's already been said. First off, Gina does an exposition dump on the Umbra. We have no idea how she understands all this stuff about the Umbra, because throughout the entire episode, when Danny and Kirk are interacting with the Umbra, it is a silent entity. It does not talk to them, it does not converse with them, it's just searching and trying to get them. So why would the Umbra then off screen talk to Gina and be like, hey, my name is the Umbra. I've been around this many years. These are my powers. This is my favorite food. These are my favorite hobbies. The creature should not be talking to somebody, especially a victim. So that makes no sense as to how she knows all these things about the Umbra. You've only been kidnapped for what seems like to be a few days, if not hours maximum. So it didn't really make sense. Second, and this is an apparent problem I have throughout the episode. The Umbra's weakness is light. So you would treat it naturally as a vampire. If light touches it, it can damage it, it can hurt it. We see throughout the episode that when the Umbra makes contact with light inside of this dark cabin, it is not injured, it is not hurt, it just simply disappears. So, why then would turning on all the lights be a very big deal for this creature? It's not getting hurt by the light, it's just retreating from the light. So, if you were to turn on everything, theoretically it shouldn't be dead, it should just be going somewhere else where the darkness is, or maybe it exists where there's darkness. So I think some of you guys have seen the movie where it's like, I think Lights Out, where there's a ghost in somebody's house. They turn on the lights, it's there. Or when they turn off the lights, it's there. When they turn on the lights, it's gone. That should really be the situation. But no, it's really confusing. Third, when basically Gina is getting drained as an old woman and Danny and Kirk are being the victims, when the monster starts attacking Danny, it basically targets her right away, even though Gina's still left on the couch. Why would you leave behind a victim? I mean, you spent all this time on Gina, you lured her in, and it's explained that the creature will take over the identity of its victim once it's finished with it. Why would you not finish the job? Job's not finished. It's right there on the couch. Why are you going straight for Danny? Don't really make much sense. And the fourth one, and this one is the one that kind of took me out the most of the episode, that stopped it from being top 5. The creature knocked out Danny and Kirk in the beginning. It has some power that can make you fall asleep and knock you out. Why did it not drain them right then and there when they were knocked out against the wall? It's not like Gina came over with the flashlight and stunned the thing and made it run away. She was on the couch. Why did the thing not just take out Gina and Kirk right there while they were slumped on the wall when they first came in? That made no sense. I didn't understand why the thing didn't just take them out right then and there, because then it has to play a cat and mouse game the rest of the episode. Aside from a plot point, it's really apparent. Like, imagine Michael Myers were to knock out some of his victims and they're just there on the wall. And next thing you know, Michael Myers decides, you know what, I'm not going to kill them. I'm just going to wait till they wake up and then have a challenge. You can chalk that up to him being a human, but the Umbra's not a human. It's just another entity. So those things took it out. I would say that this episode is an 8.5 out of 10. It's very good. I think you guys would love it. But if you keep rewatching this episode, you are going to notice the things that we talk about. And I think that unless you're able to excuse it, that's the only way this would be one of the best episodes in the show. But those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I kind of equate how I feel about this almost as equal to how I feel about Mascot from Haunting Hour.
Yeah.
You know,
Good.
you have a
Good point.
killer villain, killer concept, killer cast, but the plot holes eat away at your brain. The logic eats away at your brain. Now, Bigfoot Ridge, I've seen way sloppier and lazier dark episodes. I've seen lazy Goosebumps. I've seen some lazy Haunting Hour. But like I said, all you need is a little more context with the Umbra in some facet and maybe how Gina came across this information. I think a lot of that would have been cleared up. But runtime is a B, bruh. Back in the day, that 21, 22-minute time crunch, they lived and died by it. And that takes away sometimes some things that you probably need to make a story feel more whole, or sometimes it can drag it out, right? I know Micah might think that the story drags, but I feel like what the story maybe needed, instead of just spending time doing nothing and sitting around in the fireplace room, build more of an atmosphere in the backstory. Make it more chilling about Gina and what she's been through. Show that to the audience, how she got to this point. Show them why they should be afraid of this Umbra thing, other than implications and things that prod in your mind. Show them, and that will be more impactful. For thought.
Could add some haunted mask 2 type of scenes. Seeing Gina become old, that could have been really freaky to watch.
That would have been cool. Body horror.
Mhm.
That would have been cool. Morphing sequence. But hey, fruit for thought. Let's get into Spongy's thoughts, and then we'll get into the victor.
Yeah, I also wanted to bring this up. I don't know if anybody else thought about this, but this episode reminded me a lot of Haunting Our Black Eyes, or whatever that episode's called. Or Red Eyes, Red Eyes. I said Black Eyes, Red Eyes. That's
Mhm.
also about this shadow entity following people. And I thought that the Umbra was kind of like that because, it's kind of draining energy, but in Red Eyes, it's taking over people. So I can see the Haunting Hour getting inspired maybe by this.
All right, now let's see Spongy's thoughts on the episode. All right, so he said this was also covered in my top 10 dark episode list. For some reason, I always figured that this would just be a fine one based on the energy the title gave me. I've never been more glad to be wrong as I really like this one. Yeah, it's quite good. I dig the survival angle with them being in a cabin during winter with little to live off as this entity is also there. It does a good job of ramping up tension all the way to the climax. I'm biased towards this kind of thing, but it's still well done. The spirit thing itself is a cool concept with it taking your life force and how it doesn't have a concrete form that we see. Call that lazy, I guess, but it works in the context even if the glowing eyes look goofy. There are some logic issues you can have with how this thing operates. Plus, the time frame is odd as we don't know how long Gina has been gone, and it must be long enough for others to want to give up on her. For me, it's done well enough for me to forgive it, and I feel it could be worse if they try to go it all more deeply. That would weigh it down. The emotional side is good with Danny wanting to find Gina as she feels guilty since Gina went missing after she decided not to go with her when she went out. There are some small, nice moments alongside the bigger ones with Gina. It can border on melodramatic, but in a good way. I like that it starts quickly and doesn't let up, but maybe it's too quick, as the reveal that they're looking for Gina at the start is abrupt, and we hardly get to meet the kids before getting into things. It does borrow from episodes with Shiny Red Bicycle and Captured Souls, but it carves enough of its own niche with the setting. It is well paced, intense, and an emotional watch that was solid and engaging from the start to finish. A pleasant surprise, if there was ever one. Bigfoot has nothing to do with this. Hayden Christensen and Brooke Nevin, aka Rachel Animorphs, Aaron Wright, are here, and they're good. Better than I expected. Yeah, so I guess two things building off of his thoughts. I actually would say that the fact that you get right into the action with the episode's actually better, in my opinion. I think that Dark always has that typical thing where they introduce the character. They'll be like, Timmy grew up in this setting, in this suburb. He loved ice cream. This was this, this was that. I like the fact you get right into the action and then you sort of find out more about the characters. And also, I think Spongy brought up a good point that I didn't pay attention that Gina was left behind by Danny because she decided not to go with her. So I think that actually is pretty good decision. That the reason why Danny also feels so bad is because she directly did something that she feels guilty caused her to be kidnapped, and maybe if she was there at that time, it might have not targeted her because it seems like the Umbra likes picking off people one by one as opposed to together. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I also should bring up that Spongy kind of pointed this out. The title is obviously clickbait. Like
Yeah.
if you're looking at it from the outside and you see a title called "The Tale of Bigfoot Ridge," what is your first thought? Holy crap! Are you afraid of the dark's doing a Sasquatch story?
Yeah.
No, 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 no. It's just the name of what they call the ridge in the story. Super clickbait. I don't think even Goosebumps is that egregious sometimes. Well, it can be, but you know what I mean? Like they could have named it something else. The tale of the Snow Lodge cabin or whatever, and have been just fine. I don't know, but Bigfoot Ridge. Eh. I actually saw
Tail of the
somebody.
Lonesome Cabin. There you go.
I actually saw somebody make a scathing review about this episode on the internet, and they said that one of the reasons why they hated it was because they genuinely thought they were going to get a Sasquatch story, but they're like, no, we got some dumb possession story, and that's why they hated it. So there you go.
Son of Slappy syndrome. There you go.
Yeah, son of Slappy syndrome there. But some people operate like that, I guess. They look at the title and that's how they window shop a story. And if you don't read the synopsis, I guess I can see why you're bummed. But That's why they include a synopsis. To read your synopsis, people. All right. So, with that being said, let's lead off with Spongy. Does Spongy mention who he thinks will win in this face-off?
Believe he does. Let me see. All right, so going to the end. He says comparison. This is a close call. Both are very good standouts and perhaps some minor drawbacks, but I'm going for Bigfoot Ridge. Double Dip being a short story means minor issues are heightened, and I do prefer ones with just a bit more going on in the bulk of it. Still really good, just not perfect. Bigfoot Ridge has a bit of everything with the scary isolation and emotional resonance. Gotta be the most underrated episode, even among season 6. Both are strong winter horror stories, but Bigfoot used the runtime to do more for me. So his pick is Bigfoot Ridge.
Okay, and I can see that because a short story, like I said, like we've already talked about, it's hard to base a short story in comparison to an episode or a book. It's just hard to look at the moving parts in a different way like that. So I can understand where Spongy's coming from. Anybody else you want to take it over? Which one do you think is better?
Michael, what's your pick?
Well, I think it's obvious from my rating. It's obviously Bigfoot Ridge. I'm kidding. No, it's Double Dip Horror. I just think that Double Dip Horror had a more unique story, in my opinion. I think just again the way it's written and the juxtaposition of this very light and happy setting with this very sinister story works very well. I prefer the darker ending of this over what we got in Bigfoot Ridge. I think overall it's a bit more of an effective, scary story to me. I just didn't find Bigfoot Ridge to be that scary as well, which is another reason why. So I would choose Double Dip Horror.
Okay. All right, so we got 1-1. BD, which one are you gonna pick?
So I think that you're right that short stories are hard to compare, but I've always been a big fan of just short stories and horror in general. And I think that the caveat to that rule is if you find a short story that you consider to be the best, you'll notice that the story is so good, so tight, so well done that it can actually compete against more lengthier stories that aren't as well executed. Examples being Why I Hate Jack Frost, P.S. Don't Write Back. Even if you go to like Nightmare Hour, Haunting Hour from R.L. Stine, Halloween Dance, etc. Stephen King, The Boogeyman. There's so many examples of short stories that are fantastic and sometimes beat out full length things. This is one of those in my case. The thing about Double Dip Horror is that I can see why Spongy had some problems with the filler, but me personally, I don't think the story has any filler. I don't think it wastes any beats. I don't think it wastes any time. And the way the story interconnects everything so well, like I think that the urban legend in the story, the boy in the story, the twins in the story, the juxtaposing setting, the heavy hit punch that you get with the reveal. It almost seems like you're putting together a puzzle. Everything fits. I don't think that you really could add anything unless you needed to fill a runtime to make an adaptation. With Bigfoot Ridge, it's really good. There are a lot of factors to it, but if you can't make that puzzle fit perfectly, I don't think you'd beat Double Dip Horror because Bigfoot Ridge has some plot holes, has some fluff that could have been used better, and while it does have more stuff going on, I think that stuff has to connect together perfectly for me to put it above something like Double Dip Horror, which is essentially the perfect package. So I give it to the short story.
All right, so that's 2-1, which leads me to decide either a tie or a clear victor. Here's the thing, Double Dip Horror. It's in my top 5 tales to give you goosebumps short stories. It's easily one of the best short stories I've found in kids horror, and there's a lot of solid ones out there, like a lot of great ones. But Double Dip Horror, to me, even comparing the first time I read it to the first time I watched Bigfoot Ridge, I think I had a bigger reaction to Double Dip Horror than I did to Bigfoot Ridge, even though, like I said, I loved it a whole lot more the first time I watched Bigfoot Ridge, but every time I've experienced it, it goes down and down and down. When I reread Double Dip Horror about a week or two ago, I still loved it as much as I did before. And to speak on what you said, BD, I'm right there with you. With short stories, when they're executed that good, when you're comparing it to longer media, the longer media, even though it has much more moving parts and stuff in the middle, that stuff has to be on point to match up. Because if it doesn't, the short media is going to win, right? And like I said, I think Double Dip could have been its own episode. I think it could have been its own book. If you wanted to flesh it out, by all means, do it. Bigfoot Ridge, there's only so much you can do with that concept because, you can go spend a full book and spend the first third of it going over, Danny feeling remorse about Gina or whatever. But then once you get to the cabin, you're stuck there. They don't leave the cabin. There's no underlying mystery other than the villain. And like I said, the episode doesn't do the greatest job there showing what could be impossibility with the cabin. It focuses on one room and that's it, right? There's no real underlying mystery because if there was a mystery, Gina spoiled it and when she info dumped on it, info dumped them. So yeah, what it could have should have with Bigfoot Ridge. I think the emotions are better. I think the characters are a bit more iconic to me than Double Dip's characters. They don't really resonate with me as iconic, but they're really good in their own right, though. I think the twist of Double Dip is darker, and I like how it ends better than Bigfoot Ridge. Not saying that I'm against the Kumbaya. Like I said, I think I like it here, but I have a specific flavor I'm looking for, and Double Dip just fits that more. So for me, I'm gonna give it to Double Dip. Like I said, Bigfoot Ridge does give it a run for its money in certain categories, but wholesale Double Dip horror wins. This is just a slam dunk in my taste, so that's why it's a no-brainer there. So it looks like Goosebumps gets the victory over Are You Afraid of the Dark. This is the first time we faced off a short story, just the short story by itself, against an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, and Goosebumps won. But this was a valiant fight. Not saying that this episode from Are You Afraid of the Dark is all that inferior by any means. Go check both of these stories out and let us know in the comment section which ones did you like more? Did you love them both? Did you not like them? Like maybe Micah with Bigfoot Ridge. Who knows? Let us know. So with that out the way, we do have a discussion tonight. After talking about some wintry horror, I thought it would be fun to just bring up the topic of winter horror and what you find to be underrated. Think of like a snowy setting story or something that you've experienced that sticks out in your brain, or maybe that takes place in the winter time, like Christmas or New Year's or whatever you could think of that you think people should give some attention to if you had to give a recommendation. And I'll throw it out to whoever wants to take it.
You want to go, Mike, or you want me to take it?
You can go.
Okay. So I guess the biggest thing to me about like winter is that obviously you have two sets. You have Christmas and then you have the winter story. So I'll give you guys two Christmas stories that I feel are underrated, should be talked about. One of them is much more underrated than the other. And then I'll give you just one winter setting story. Now, me personally, I think that I've seen a lot of Christmas horror out there. And frankly speaking, I think that now there's not really anything else to do with Christmas horror. I feel like I've seen pretty much everything. There's only certain things you can do with it. And one of the biggest things I love about winter setting is you have a lot more freedom. There's no limit. And I think that there's something creepier about, let's say, instead of being with your family on Christmas night and something bad happens, you being stuck out in the middle of a blizzard with the snowy forest. It's a lot creepier. I don't know if you guys think like this, but I'm a horror fan. Have you ever looked out at a forest or setting where there's just a bunch of freshly laid snow? You know what's the scariest thing you could see there? A silhouette. Yeah, I think like that sometimes. I look out at snowy signs and wonder, like, what if I just saw somebody standing out there, all black silhouette? It's one of the scariest things on earth to me personally. So the setting is a big benefit to these underrated horror stories. So for Christmas, I'll give you the least underrated, but still one you should check out, Nosferatu by Joe Hill. Joe Hill, for those of you who don't know, is Stephen King's son. This is a book that I find to be the perfect horror book. It's my favorite horror book I've read, if not up there as my close second. It's amazing. It is the best way I could put it is imagine a roller coaster, but it's a book. Imagine you're watching a movie, but it's a book. Watching a TV show, but it's a book. It's 700 pages. A lot of you guys just got the Looney Tunes Google eye. You just said 700 pages. You maybe have read Stephen King before, and you're like, bro, 20 pages of Stephen King feels like 100. This is Joe Hill, his son. He doesn't waste any words. There's not a lot of text on each page. You can quickly get through. There's even illustrations in the book, and it has amazing villains. It's got amazing horror, and it has an amazing setting. It's got a place called Christmas Land, which is a Christmas-themed amusement park. It is horrific. Imagine every single Christmas and winter trope that you could imagine, but horrified. So you have a giant Ferris wheel. You have a 200-foot tall Christmas tree, except on that Christmas tree, it's severed thumbs. It's decapitated heads. It's intestines. You got snowmen. You got families of snowmen that are moving by the roads, except there's a kid, and the kid has chopped off the head of another snowman mother with an axe. You got all this crazy stuff going on. It's one of the best settings. Amazing. You guys should read the book. Second, I'll give you. This one, a lot of you guys won't know. It's from the worst horror book I ever read. It was a short story collection called Hark the Herald Angels Scream. But the best Christmas story I ever read is inside of there. So ask for this book as a gift. It's called The Hangman's Bride by Sarah Pinborough. Imagine the story of the Scrooge, except you have the Scrooge as a businessman, and you have a bunch of chimney cleaners as the boys. The chimney cleaner has to go to a manor that belongs to a local hangman in the village, and he goes inside of the chimney to clean it, and he sees a yokai corpse of a woman upside down, hanging down in the chimney, chasing him down and trying to kill him. And as that happens to him during Christmas Eve and Christmas night, he then finds out that this lady is tracking him down, trying to hunt him down. Nowhere is safe. He's stuck inside of the manor, and there's a murder mystery that he has to solve. And solving that murder mystery might give you context as to who the woman is, what's going on in the house. And it ends off with the grandpa telling a story to a kid, and maybe not, that grandpa is tied to a character in the story. I'll leave it at that. And finally, just for a winter setting, Fear Street Ski Weekend, number 10. Fear Street Ski Weekend. It's about a bunch of teenagers who get locked inside of a cabin during a winter setting, possibly with a crazy man. And let's just say that the ending to the story is very wild. It involves an iced over lake, a snowmobile, and some James Bond type of action. And I'll leave it at that. So those are my picks.
All right. I'm gonna pass it over to Micah. Micah, what do you think is some underrated winter horror?
I don't know. I honestly haven't really exposed myself to much winter horror, so I don't really have a lot to say on it. But the one I can think of that I believe is winter horror, I haven't read the short story in a while, but it is The Wendigo from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I think that's winter. I can't remember for sure, but if it is, it's basically about this hunter who is going out into the woods to just do some hunting in the middle of winter, and he hires this guide named Defago, who is an Indian who is kind of native to the grounds. And while they're out hunting, they get caught in this massive snowstorm where they have to kind of huddle up in this tent for the night. And while in this tent, they start hearing like the wind howling around them. And slowly they start hearing this voice coming through the wind calling Defago's name over and over again throughout the night. And as this goes on, Defago is just freaking out. Like he just continuously gets more and more terrified as this voice keeps calling him. And eventually it gets to the point where he straight up runs out of his tent and abandons the hunter. And the next morning afterwards, the hunter goes out, and I'm going to give a little spoilers just because you got to at least say something about the ending here because it's probably the most impactful part about the story. He goes out of his tent and finds Defago's footprints in the snow. And the further back he goes, the longer the footprints go, almost as if Defago is being dragged at some point and eventually just disappear altogether. And so he's kind of weirded out, doesn't know what to do, goes back into town and visits this, I think it's like a pub or something like that, and asks about what happened. And some guys were jokingly saying maybe it was the Wendigo that got him, which is basically this being that comes with the wind and basically drags you along until your feet are nothing, or drags you along until you're nothing but ash, and then pulls you into the sky. and the story kind of ends in a really grisly way. I'm not going to say exactly what happens at the end, but it maybe involves Defago coming back in some way. But I think that short story is great. It's easily one of the standouts of that first Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark book. It has great winter atmosphere. It's really slowly built up and creepy. I think the way the Wendigo is in this story, honestly, I kind of like that version of the Wendigo better than the more stereotypical cannibalism focused version of the Wendigo that we get in most other modern folklore versions of it. I kind of like the way they do it in this short story a little bit better because it's just a bit more eerie and mysterious, which is what I like about it. So I love this short story. I think it's easily a great one.
The Stephen Gamel artwork's also iconic because you got footprints in the
Mhm.
snow, the trees, and in winter you got dead trees, so that sketch artwork works. And the footprints stop like halfway into the field, so you kind of get a little bit of an ominous feel what happened to the footprints. So that's also a highlight for the winter setting.
I think I'm gonna go full adult horror for my picks. Great pick, mind you, Micah. I have quite a few. Uh, from what I experienced, I do have a book by Lee Clark. I think it's called Carnivore that I really want to read. It's about a dinosaur that gets resurrected out of ice, I think, in like Antarctica or something. It's like a wild, like, carnosaur type story. But other than that, like that's one I really want to read. I do have some Christmas and winter ones I want to talk about. One of which I think is pretty much Goosebumps for adults, but it's like a thriller movie. It's not traditional in that idea. It's called Black Cadillac. It's like a low budget, early 2000s thriller movie about cars. Think about like a killer car movie, right? But it's not in that traditional way. You have these three, young guys, like, late teens, maybe early college days, and they're out having a night with fake IDs at a bar. But they get into a bar fight and they leave the bar and they skedaddle out of town and they're driving back to the next state over where they live, and it's snowing. It's complete pitch black. There's no street lights. They're just on this, back road for a while, for a long time for the drive. But they're being followed by this black Cadillac, and this black Cadillac wants to like race them at first, and then it becomes more of like a cat and mouse thing, and then it becomes more like, oh crap, their lives are in danger kind of thing. And there's plenty of like really great done scenes where they're racing the car on ice in the middle of the night, just to get away from this black Cadillac, and you're like, oh crap, the ice is cracking and stuff like that. And there's wild moments where they end up in a town where they have to repair their car, and there's a whole scene where the Cadillac breaks into the like barrels through the building. It's one of the guys. It's so over the top, but stuff like that, right? It's just cheesy car horror that I think people should go watch. It's one of the most underrated low budget movies I've ever seen. Well shot, well acted, and it's great. There's an episode from a show that I recently actually got done watching. It's actually one of my favorite episodes from that show. It's called Monsters. The episode in question is called Sleeping Dragon. Now, if you've ever seen the original Thing from the Other World, or maybe John Carpenter's The Thing, this has a similar idea, but instead of doing like a shape-shifting alien, imagine a dinosaur sentient being trapped in like an alien saucer that they awaken out of this fossil, and it basically goes on a rampage inside of this bunker in some wintry tundra. And yeah, it's B movie cheese, but it is very tense and it's well made again. And it's like I said, one of my favorite episodes from that show. But actually, this was something I recently discovered for Christmas. I know in our past Christmas podcasts, I already went over a lot of my favorites, like Splinter Claus, or maybe Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 5, The Toy Maker, or, Krampus, stuff like that. But this movie is actually more of a spoof and parody of Hallmark Christmas movies. So if you are the type of person that hates Hallmark movies, like just cannot stand it whatsoever, you should go watch this. It's a sci-fi movie. Yes, it's a sci-fi movie. It's called Letters to Satan Claus. And the premise is like it's like a Hallmark movie, but it's done in the sci-fi B movie kind of way. So this reporter, she is on the typical Hallmark quest. She's bigger than life, but she has to go to her small town roots because it's the holidays and visit family. However, there's a morbid backstory. When she was a kid, she wrote a letter to Santa Claus and put it into like those holiday decorative bins that it says letters to Santa Claus, but she accidentally wrote it to Satan Claus. And the morning of Christmas that year, she wakes up and finds that her parents' mutilated bodies are inside of presents, and Satan has told her that he fulfilled her wish, and her and her sister were orphaned. And when she comes back to town, she gets drunk one night and writes another letter to Satan Claus, which brings him back and starts unleashing havoc on the town. And Satan, of course, finds creative ways to kill some people. And you go down the whole parody of her wanting to be in a relationship because this is supposed to be a spoof of a Hallmark movie after all, but she's not the traditional Hallmark heroine, let's say. And it's just really dumb fun. I mean, it's just a movie that you don't take seriously, turn your brain off, and you have fun with it. Yes, it can be cliche, but it's doing that to make fun of it. I've never seen another movie like it. It's one of a kind, and I absolutely love it. It's going to be an annual watch every year. And I discovered it this past year. I actually covered it on my Horror Free For All channel, so if you want to go look at it over there and what I have to say, go check that out. But yeah, those are my picks.
Also, another pick I just thought of. It's not adult horror. It's another kind of kids horror. Not tech. It's a Christmas movie. It is my opinion, a kids horror Christmas movie. You cannot change my mind. The Jim Carrey version of A Christmas Carol. The Robert Zemeckis 2009 motion capture version. In my opinion, that is a Christmas horror movie, and it'll never change my mind on that. It has some of the most horrific visuals of any version of A Christmas Carol you will ever witness, from the scene where Jacob Marley's head appears on the door knocker. When Scrooge reaches to touch it, Marley's jaw just unhinges in this insane jump scare. You got scenes of the Ghost of Christmas Present literally decaying away into a skeleton before turning into dust as the clock chimes. You get scenes of Scrooge literally falling into hell. There's like just so much disturbing visuals in this version of A Christmas Carol that I don't know. I love this version. It's easily my favorite version of A Christmas Carol. I just think it's a very well done version and just really amplifies the horror, which is probably why I like it the most. But
yeah, I know what you mean. Since you brought up Scrooge, here's another recommendation. I just thought of this. If you're a fan of Tales from the Crypt and you like pretty much all the creators involved with that, there's a very classic Bill Murray movie from the 80s directed by Richard Donner and has a lot of the Tales from the Crypt people involved. It feels like a Tales from the Crypt episode. It's called Scrooged. Go watch that movie. I don't even want to give the plot away, but it is an iconic 80s Christmas comedy horror type of thing. It's a weird hodgepodge like Tales from the Crypt can be. Go watch that movie. It is incredible.
There's also a Tales from the Dark Side episode called Seasons of Belief. Go watch that.
Oh, the Grither episode? Oh, that has the dad from Christmas Story in it. Yeah, go watch that, because if you're a big fan of Darren McGavin from Christmas Story, he's in a Christmas episode there. Really good. Really good episode. Yeah, there's so much winter and holiday content out there when you really think about it. I mean, especially in adult media, I don't think there's a lot in kids horror, which begs the question, why isn't there a lot for kids horror?
Yeah.
Like adult horror, there's so much, but kids horror, there's not a lot being put to paper or put to screen. And as you can see, we had to go in this episode to compare a short story to an episode because the pickings are slim, right? I just wish there was more. Maybe somebody out there can make something.
Also, big eye raiser too is like a lot of these kids horror shows back in the day. Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark? It's recorded in Canada. I have friends and family in Canada. It snows all the time. What excuse is there not to shoot within the snow? It piles up snow in Canada. So.
Yeah, like that's the thing is like I feel like if the Goosebumps show had continued, I feel like Double Dip Horror would have been a shoe-in for a later episode adaptation, because like It wouldn't require any kind of elaborate monster design or anything like that. You know, you just need a snowy environment and a ski lodge, and you're good.
Yeah, and the snow is in plethora there, so no reason not to do it.
It's the B word. And it always will come back to this. You know, like you have to look at the film schedule. You know, Goosebumps, unlike I think Dark, they were more willing to film in the cold more than Goosebumps was. Maybe in season 1, you can see like Piano Lessons Could Be Murder, for example. You can tell that it's cold outside because you can see their breath. But most of the time, they're filming in like the summer because they don't want to get stuck up in some snow. But Are You Afraid of the Dark, especially in the revival seasons, I noticed this more than the first 5. They were willing to film in the cold. Like Tale of Vampire Town, they're wearing winter clothes in that episode, and you can tell it's cold outside when they go to visit the vampire town. So, you know, I don't know. You know, it's an opportunity that I think that Dark should have capitalized on more. I think now that I'm thinking about it, there is an episode. I don't know if it's the Tale of the Reanimator, but I believe there's snow in that one. If I'm not mistaken, there's another episode around this point where there's clear snow on the ground outside. I forget which one it is. I don't know why I thought of that, but I think it is that one if I had to guess. But yeah, that's what they could have done to separate themselves. You know, try to be more atmospheric with that and actually use Canada, which is a cold place, and showcase that. Big missed opportunity.
Even when you watch later shows like The Haunting Hour, we covered the 2 Christmas episodes in Haunting Hour. There's barely any snow scenes. Like the ones I remember, there's hardly anything involving snow.
You know, Haunting Hour, I think for a lot of the episodes, I think they just filmed it in the same neighborhood setting for the most part.
Pretty much.
Unless they ventured out of the home life, it was pretty much in that neighborhood.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
you
very
know-
evident in like, yeah.
Yeah, continue, Micah. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it's very evident in episodes, yeah, like Catching Cold, Afraid of Clowns, Really You. Like you can just tell like the street is the exact same thing. Like it's and even like they even shoot it in the very similar ways. Like so it's not even trying to hide it.
Same schools too, probably the same school used for plenty of episodes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as noticeable as something like Nightmare Room, though. Nightmare Room is basically the same set every episode.
The Nightmare Room should have just been Bone Chillers, man. Interconnected all in the same school. Just a bunch of stuff happening.
I mean, there is the fan theories, like I've seen it on Haunting Hour and Nightmare Room, that you can headcanon that the neighborhood of Haunting Hour is, you know, where all these kids in these stories live, and it's like some parallel dimension where supernatural stuff can exist. Or the Nightmare Room, same thing. The school being the running gag in like every episode. Mine is like one or
It's
two.
like Fear Street, Shady style. 50 billion things happen in this one place, man.
So yeah, that's our that wraps up this podcast episode. Appreciate everyone that stayed from the beginning to the end. If you like this podcast, please drop a like and leave a comment if you like as well. Give us some feedback. Give us your thoughts. Like we said earlier, if you experience these stories, which ones did you like more than the other? Did you like them equally? Did you love them? We're always curious to hear about that. If you're not subbed up to the Horrorlander, aka BD, or Micah, the Ultimate Goosebumps Man, I will have their channels and links in the comment section and in the description down below. I also have Spongy444's information if you want to go follow him and look at his blog or maybe follow his Twitter page. You can do so as well. If you're not subbed to me, the host of Goosejunkies, I would appreciate if you dropped a sub, dropped a like, whatever you feel like doing. It's always appreciated. It goes a long way, and it shows that you guys like the content that we're producing. And I know we promised this. We promised this in episode 31, but I assure you, for episode 33, we will do Calling All Creeps versus Alien Candy. So stay tuned for that. And I guess I'll go ahead and give you a spoiler for episode 34. We are going to venture out of traditional kids horror that everybody knows, and we're actually going to be doing Platinum Age kids horror. This is stuff that took place before Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps. So we're going back to the 1980s when the genesis and the birth of the kids horror genre market niche was starting to become a thing. And we're going to be looking at 80s Twilight Zone and Tales from the Dark Side. And we're going to be facing off 2 episodes there, The Cuddy Black Sow and The Shadow Man. So stay tuned for that for episode 34. Yeah, any closing thoughts, guys, before we get off?
If you get the most likes on any of our episodes on that one that we're going to be doing for episode 34, we will bear through the pain and do Tales from the Dark Side, Mookie and Pookie versus Are You Afraid of the Dark, Tale of the Virtual Pets. It'll be the most painful thing we ever do in our life, but we'll do it for you. Just show support on that episode, bro.
Yeah, show us support. If you guys like the Platinum Age content, we'll keep it going, but we're just trying to experiment around. And hopefully you guys will like it and come to check it out. But till next time, everyone take care. Have a happy new year, and we'll see you in 2025. And we hope to continue just talking about kids horror and keep the passion alive. So take care, everyone. Hope to see you soon.
Arrivederci.